Hello everyone, good morning for those of you in Europe and good afternoon for those companies that are joining us in China. So my name is Javier Baut and I'm the Business Development Advisor at the EU SME Center, and thanks for joining this webinar series. So for those of you who are not familiar with this platform, you can see in the right upper side of the screen there is a console you can use to interact with us. You can send us your questions, so we will encourage you to, during the webinar, ask anything you might find interesting. So about the EU SME Center, we are a project fully funded by the European Union, and the aim of this project, the purpose of the project, is to help assist European small and medium enterprises to export to China. Basically, what we're trying to achieve is to help the companies to get ready for the Chinese market. We do that by providing free and confidential information, advice, and practical support services. So the information and advice we do is we reply to inquiries that companies send to us. We can do that through email, through phone, or if you come to Beijing, where the center is located, we can answer your questions face-to-face. We have a strong knowledge center. We have over 80 publications, sector reports, guidelines, case studies. So please log in our website and download the documents that are relevant for your business. We do organize a lot of training, physical training, like we do it events in Europe and also here in China. So if you're interested in one of our seminars, also have a look at our website where we publish all our events. We do webinars like this one we're doing today, and we also have two databases. One of our databases is on exhibitions and trade shows in China, and we do have also a database on service providers. These are companies that can help you to do business and develop your business in China. Our support services include the hot desk. For those companies that are coming to Beijing, they can use our facilities for up to 2 weeks, and they can stay with us, use our resources, meet our experts, and benefit from a physical location in Beijing. We are developing more and more matchmaking and networking events to also help you grow your business in China. So today's webinar, it's about holding jurisdiction for investment in China. And I'm very happy to introduce our speaker, Ms. Cristina Coluccia. She's the director of a Claco Group in China. So she's been working in the Chinese legal and accounting industry for over 10 years when she joined the Claco Group as a China director. She's fluent in English, German, French, and Mandarin. And she advises and represents Western clients for basically all over the world, and represent their business interest in China. She has worked in a large number of transactions, including foreign direct investment, corporate restructuring, company liquidations, M&A deals, and frequently advises and represents foreign clients in tax, accounting, and related matters. So Cristina also is a co-author of Claco Group's monthly magazine, ChinaInvest.biz, and she provides insight into investment, tax, and operational issues for foreign companies entering and expanding in China. So she also has contributed to numerous other publications in different specialized media in China and around the world. So with that said, I would like to give the microphone to Cristina so she can start with her presentation. Go ahead, Cristina, please.
Thank you, Javier. Thank you for the kind introduction. So I'd like to start off with today's agenda, which is looking at how a company or an SME can plan their investments into China, making a comparison between Singapore versus Hong Kong versus China, looking at license and import regulations, specific case studies, and also other holding jurisdictions which are popular amongst SMEs that are coming into the region. So to start off today's presentation, we will be looking at Singapore versus Hong Kong versus China, and more concretely, what questions to ask yourself when planning your China investment. So there are a series of questions that clients that I meet when they're first planning on doing their market entry into the China region, they do a list of who, what, where, why, and when ideas, basically formulating their business plan in regards to how they're planning to enter the market. And the first question that comes to mind is, if you're going to establish a business in China, who are you actually going to employ to manage that business? Now, companies have varying degrees of commitment to the market, risk that they want to take on when going into the market, and many may start off utilizing distributors or agents, and others might say, I'm going to create a department back home in my home jurisdiction that's going to be responsible for this expansion into the China market. Others might make a more serious commitment and say that they will second an expatriate to go to China and be based there and develop the business from there. Others might be a lot more cost conscious because obviously seconding expatriates to China has become quite expensive, that they might localize their business and hire only local people, local employees to develop their business. Now, things that I have seen in the last 12 to 18 months, and it's a trend that I've noticed amongst multinationals, medium-sized companies as well as small companies in China, is that they are fostering mixed cultures, mixed philosophies by having, let's say, 2 general managers or 2 responsible individuals, one who's a foreigner and one who's a Chinese, that can culturally bring in both philosophies, both cultures into the business. And it works quite successfully. Now, when you're thinking about your China investment, and many people also want to be tax efficient when they're doing these structures, is if they're employing expatriates or they're hiring senior management level people, one of the questions that comes up often is whether salaries can be split between the holding company that they're planning on establishing, as well as the China company, and potentially a third party, which is in the home jurisdiction. In addition, perhaps only the salary is paid out of China and bonuses can be paid out of Hong Kong. These are all possibilities, but they need to be structured accordingly and in advance to make sure contracts are set up and the structures are set up. The next question is, what am I actually going to be doing in China? What is my business strategy? And this is where a lot of SME clients that I have seen tend to lose their way because they feel that they want to do everything from day one rather doing things step by step. So you need to look in the short term as well as in the long term. What is your business strategy? Are you doing sourcing? Are you doing sales? Are you providing services? Will it be a mixture of all those items? Will you be manufacturing at some point as well? Then you also have to consider with what you're actually doing, do you need to have IP protected? If, for example, you're a sales company or service company, do you want to protect your brand, your trademark, or your patents in China? I'm sure many of you have heard of IP squatters. One of the most important aspects when you're first entering the market is really making sure that your IP gets registered. And the key point when registering your IP is whether you want it to be held from your new holding company or whether you want it to be held from your China company or from your home jurisdiction. And again, there are tax implications associated with all of that. In addition, do you need special licenses? Can you obtain these licenses easier in your holding jurisdictions like in Hong Kong or in Singapore? This is a question that I will get on to a little bit later during the presentation. In addition, if you're thinking long term, perhaps you want your holding structure to become your Asian hub. Perhaps China is not the only market that you want to enter, but you're also looking at other regions like Taiwan, Korea, Japan, etc., and maybe you want to have a regional hub at some point. And this, again, can also be done from Hong Kong or can also be done from Singapore. The third point is, where is your business in China going to be in the short and in the long term? You need to have a short-term strategy, focus on it, give yourself a certain goal and period of time to achieve what you want to achieve, but also don't forget to look long-term and make sure that your long-term goals are feasible in the structures that you're developing. The next is, why are you really going to China? Obviously, everybody reads in the media and in the newspapers that China is currently booming, particularly if you're looking to sell unique products. But the key thing is making sure that you do your market research, understanding the market, know whether your product can be sold. It's much, much better and more cost efficient if you do this research study prior to going into the market. Make sure you do have your business plan laid out and set out, and it's black and white in terms of your goals and strategies. The next is, when are you planning to enter the market? And this is a really key point, because if you haven't done business yet in China, or you're just starting to do your business, you will learn very quickly that laws and regulations change daily. And what you've set out as your business plan today might change in 6 months because of the laws and the regulations. It might change for a positive way because regulations have become easier, or it might change in a negative way because regulations have become tougher. The next point to consider is, do laws change in Hong Kong or Singapore? Would it be better for you to develop your business out of Hong Kong, for example, which is very close to China, if you know that the laws and regulations are transparent and will change less regularly than in China? What are your tax planning incentives? Have you thought about tax planning at all? You need to make sure that you develop efficient structures, not only for your corporate structure, your tax, customs, IP, employment of staff, etc. These are all generally the aspects you need to focus on. Now, I wanted to pinpoint and highlight for you some differences, some key differences, and make an apples-to-apples comparison in regards to establishing an entity in Hong Kong versus Singapore versus in China. I won't focus on every single point that's listed in these tables. This is something that you can look at later. I've been informed that the presentation will be distributable after the event, but I wanted to just mention the basic legal system. Hong Kong and Singapore follow the British common law system, which basically means that the law is very transparent. It's been established for centuries. It's black and white, and only on rare occasions do the regulations change. In China, it's according to PRC law, company law, which does change on a regular basis. The next point I wanted to talk to you about is tax on offshore profits. Hong Kong is renowned globally for being what many consider as a tax haven. Just to clarify, Hong Kong is no longer considered a tax haven by the OECD, and as a consequence, there are unique methods of having tax incentive plans, very similar to Singapore, whereas in China you're paying 25% tax.
Hey, Christina.
Foreign exchange controls, yes.
Yes, sorry that I interrupt you, but before you continue with the tax explanation, I would like to have a practical question about how much easier it will be to set up a company in Hong Kong or Singapore versus China. You can elaborate on that?
Well, it's much easier to set up a company in Hong Kong or Singapore. Generally, it takes between 1 to 5 days, so less than a week, to establish the company, whereas in China it takes a minimum of 6 months to establish a company.
Okay.
The requirements for establishing the Hong Kong company are very simplified. Documentation is very easy, whereas in China the level of documentation and paperwork is miles long. The only downside that I do have to say about Hong Kong and Singapore is the banking system. Currently, banks in Hong Kong and Singapore are less transparent than they used to be. They really are very strict on knowing who the owners of a company are, and generally you do need to fly to Hong Kong or Singapore to open the bank accounts. In China, if you're working with a local Chinese bank, it can be opened within 5 working days, whereas in Hong Kong or Singapore it usually takes 10 to 15 days to open a bank account.
Okay, thank you very much.
Javier, I would probably move on to the next slide.
Okay.
One of the key issues also that many of my clients ask me is how easy is it to maintain a company in Hong Kong, Singapore versus in China? And in Hong Kong and Singapore, to maintain a company, you don't really have to think about it. There are certain maintenance requirements that are very straightforward, and it's very similar systems to European jurisdictions. Whereas in China, the maintenance requirements are extremely strict, and you really have to follow the protocol and remember to get certain things done. So it's definitely something you have to keep in mind. What I have seen is that obviously in Hong Kong and Singapore you have the advantage of having virtual office concepts where you don't have to make these offices operational, whereas in China you really do need to have an operational office with employees located there in order to run your business. Javier, we can move to the next slide.
Okay.
The next important point to consider, especially when you're considering tax planning, is when you're utilizing Hong Kong to go into China or Singapore to go into China or even other jurisdictions, there are many companies that really do a proper tax planning before going into those markets. One of the interesting aspects is that it's only been 5 years for Hong Kong to really implement the double taxation agreements. Hong Kong and China had one of the first double taxation agreements ever signed. Hong Kong, since 2008, has actually signed 27 agreements, which is one of the fastest jurisdictions in the world to sign so many agreements. It has one of the best agreements with China. Singapore also has a very good agreement with China. And I wanted to make a comparison between Hong Kong and Singapore with China because many people nowadays choose Singapore over Hong Kong purely because of personal reasons. People are concerned by pollution levels in Hong Kong. They're concerned by the increasing standard of living in Hong Kong, although that's also changing in Singapore now. And as a consequence, people are utilizing either Hong Kong or Singapore more for preference reasons and not necessarily for tax reasons. If you look at the dividends tax for repatriation from a Chinese company to a Hong Kong or Singapore company, it's at 5%, which is extremely advantageous compared to 10% with other jurisdictions.
Hey,
China has at the moment,
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you again, but regarding this, looking at these double taxation agreements between Hong Kong and China and Singapore and China, is there a generic tax-efficient holding structure for investment into China?
That's a really good question, and this actually leads me on to the next slide. Previously, it was considered that you could have a very good tax-efficient holding structure utilizing Hong Kong, for example, for your investments into China. All you needed to do was set up your holding company, and there would be no tax questions from the Chinese side about the repatriation of dividends or even repatriation of royalty fees, licensing fees, etc. But I do have to say that this is slowly changing. Javier, you can move on to the next slide. One of the key aspects nowadays is that the Chinese tax authorities are becoming much more strict in regards to looking at the holding structures. They want to see that there is substance, and by substance it means they want to see that your company in Hong Kong, even if it's just a holding company, has some type of operational level to it. They want to see commercial substance. They want to see that the structure in Hong Kong is not just sitting there to hold the Chinese investment, but also has operational trade flows that are running through. And this has become difficult for many SMEs that have always set up a holding company in Hong Kong purely as a holding for tax planning reasons, and they've had to change these structures in the meantime in order to make sure that they comply with the Chinese authorities. So this is a change that has occurred within the last 12 to 18 months, that the Chinese tax authorities have become more strict. The basic reason and the history behind it is obviously that companies were taking advantage of the lower tax rates and trying to pay less taxes in Hong Kong as well as in China. But like every country in the world, China also needs tax money, and as a consequence to that, they are really looking firmly at these repatriations. So the key point that I want to mention here is that you shouldn't set up a holding company in Hong Kong if it's purely holding now. You should really set it up if you do have additional economic reasons or commercial reasons to set it up, basically implying whether you have trade flow that's running through it. Before hitting the case studies, I just also wanted to provide you with the trends that I see locally in the market in terms of inbound investment to China. Tax planning and market research, they're never really a concern for most SMEs, at least in the early stages. People want to make money, that's their priority. They want to develop their business, and they forget to take care of these two important points. And these are two important points that you really can't forget to do during your business planning part.
Christina,
in addition to that,
sorry to interrupt you again here, but do you have any advice on how to conduct a market research with small resources?
That's a key problem for many SMEs. Is obviously if you go to a research company, market research company, they will usually charge, from what I've seen in any case, between 10 to 20,000 euro for a proper and full breadth market research study. My belief, especially having lived in China for 10 years, is that no better research comes from having people on the ground to physically do the work for you. The problem in China is obviously that you need to have an entity in China to employ people legally. One of the key things that many service providers in China provide, as well as many chambers of commerce, is something which is called an office-in-office solution, where they will provide or they will employ the staff legally, and this staff would work for the SME and do the market research, find either suppliers or customers, and you have someone really on the ground to look at the market. And in my analysis, I found that hiring an employee on the ground to provide that service is less expensive than paying for a market research study. And the results out of that project of having the staff are invaluable compared to the research study, which in the end you have to read, and usually it's between 100 and 200 pages long.
Thank you, Christina. I totally agree. I think it's very important to have people hands-on in the market, and it's very beneficial for SMEs.
Yeah. To move on from that, I mean, I guess one of the things that I've also seen is that if you really want to go into the Chinese market, usually people always start off in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is obviously the closest country to go into China. It has the most transparent legal system. Everything is stable politically. You have also a growing banking system, although it is difficult to open bank accounts. It's just a very secure market to go into. Singapore, on the other hand, from what we've seen, is really utilized to go into the ASEAN region, which is becoming much, much more popular nowadays. So if you're looking to go into India, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, etc., people generally use Singapore for that. China is always about establishing operational entities. So it's not that you can open a PO box company in China. You really do have to establish a proper company, invest capital into it, and obviously have employees that are running it. So I wanted to go next into the actual case studies in relation to investing into China. And one of the first steps that people really do have to think about are the licenses and the import regulations that you need to go into those markets. We'll just wait for the next slide to show. So I've listed here just a couple of examples. And many people, when they are importing their products into China, they forget to check these items. In the recent 12 months or so, I've seen a growing demand for food and beverage items being imported into China, electrical consumer products, as well as medical products. And medical products is really something that is booming right now. In all of these categories, if it's food and beverage, if it's consumer products, medical products, etc., if you're not manufacturing them in China, but you're actually importing them from overseas, you do need to get special licenses and import permissions. And you do need to understand how long it takes to get these licenses. Just to give you an idea, with the 3C certification for consumer products, it can take up to 18 months to 24 months to get the approval done. In some cases, you might be lucky and it will be faster, but on general, it's around 18 to 24 months. So keep all of this in mind.
Christina, I have a question. This is an inquiry we receive frequently at the USME Center, and I would like you to clarify for us what does SEPA mean? What's the concept of SEPA?
Okay. The concept of SEPA, it stands for the Closer Economic Partnership Agreement between China and Hong Kong. And it stemmed from the fact that when Hong Kong became a part of China, there was this agreement that was put in place to benefit Hong Kong companies for entering the China market. Every year, the SEPA regulations get updated for every single industry. One of the key aspects regarding SEPA, though, is that you do need to have a physical entity in Hong Kong for a certain period of time. So it's not that you can just say, I will open up a company tomorrow and SEPA will apply to you. Generally, the three criteria is that you need to have at least 50% of your global staff based in Hong Kong. You need to have a physical office and operation in Hong Kong. You can't have PO box type concept. And you need to have trade flow and operational flow that's running through that entity. So SEPA is really there to benefit existing Hong Kong companies. That was really the historical value of it. Obviously, if SMEs decide that they want to use SEPA to go into the Chinese market, they really would need to relocate their businesses from Europe to Hong Kong. And then again, you need to evaluate whether that's advantageous or not. Now, my feeling, if you are looking to import products into the Chinese market, I think Hong Kong is one of the best locations to start off doing that, because the licensing requirements are minimal, and what's one of the biggest benefits is that it's also duty-free. So I would, Hong Kong can be considered as a starting point. The first case study I wanted to look at was selling with no representation. This is usually the first step for many of my SME clients when selling into China. It's basically they sell directly from their parent company and they have no representation locally in Asia at all, whether it's in Hong Kong or in China. They travel maybe twice, 3 times a year to China to meet with their customers, to meet with distributors, but that's as far as their commitment lies. And obviously with this case study, there's very little risk, but there's also very little commitment. And it might be a very good first step to do your research, but really in the long term, if you want to go into the market, you need to do more.
So yeah,
case study.
According to your experience, what are the limits from this selling without a representation, and what are the benefits of really having someone that is doing this representation of your company?
I mean, the benefits really is that if you're not sure whether your product sells in the market, then you've made no actual investment. And you can test out by traveling 3 times a year or even going at an exhibition in China to see whether your product sells before taking that next step in terms of setting up a physical structure. Obviously, the limitations is the fact that you don't really have momentum with selling. When you're selling products, you want to make sure you keep the momentum and you keep people thinking about your product. If you're not there locally representing your product or your service, it's very hard to keep that momentum.
Thank you, Christina.
In regards to case study 2, the next step really after you've started to do a little bit of selling onto the Chinese market is also maybe thinking about utilizing a distributor. And obviously you can utilize distributors that are based in Hong Kong or that are based in Singapore, that are based in China. I guess my key takeaway from utilizing distributors is don't sign exclusivity agreements. I've seen too many cases from SME clients that have signed exclusivity agreements. It turns out that the relationship with the distributor goes sour and they don't know how to get out of it. China is enormous. It's an enormous country, and if you're looking to go into that market, finding distributors that will just handle the northeastern market, south market, east and then west, that's already 4 to 5 distributors that you're using. And it's a great way to start off your business. It also allows you time to identify and see which distributors are working out the best for you.
Thanks, Christina. I think that's a very interesting comment, and we agree with you totally here at the USME Center. The exclusivity has to be managed carefully. I would like to ask you also, what if you find differences between the distributors in Hong Kong and in China?
Yeah, I actually do find differences, and it may sound odd to certain people, but I find cultural differences. When you're using local distributors in Hong Kong, generally they've already had a period of Western influence. Hong Kong people in general have had years, centuries of Western influence, and I feel that their level of business is much more westernized compared to distributors in China. I would say that that's just actually doing business in Hong Kong is very westernized, and doing business in China is a little bit more rough around the edges. So if you're looking to maybe start off slow and get used to the mentalities, I would start off utilizing distributors in Hong Kong who have already a great network. But eventually you do need to utilize distributors in China to get closer to the market. One key aspect I would recommend is always doing a due diligence on your distributors before utilizing them, just to make sure that they're okay.
Thank you, Christina.
The next step after utilizing distributors is possibly also utilizing sales agents. Distributors, in my definition, are generally companies that can handle more than one product line, and they already have their own branding and marketing capabilities. Sales agents, in my mind, are individual people that will represent your company and will travel throughout the countries in order to sell your products. So whether you use distributors or whether you use sales agents, it's very similar mentalities, basically. Obviously, distributors have a company behind them, and sales agents are generally individuals. Again, you can utilize sales agents that are based in Hong Kong or Singapore or China. An advantage, in my opinion, of using sales agents in Hong Kong is the fact that Hong Kong passport holders can travel anywhere in Asia. So if China is not your only market, but also other Asian countries, then obviously that's one of the advantages of having these sales agents based out of Hong Kong. In China, you always have visa restrictions, etc., and that can be one limitation. The next case study is actually utilizing a Hong Kong company in order to sell your products to your distributors or your customers. And obviously you can choose whether you have a Hong Kong or you have a Singapore company. As I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest advantages of Hong Kong as well as Singapore is the fact that it's duty-free. So you can import your products, warehouse them in Hong Kong or Singapore duty-free, and then import them for just-in-time delivery to your distributors or to your customers in China as well as the rest of Asia. One of the key advantages of Hong Kong today is the fact that if you want to invoice your customers in China in RMB, you have the capabilities to do that. Hong Kong was obviously one of the first offshore renminbi centers. It has plenty of renminbi deposits to be able to make the currency exchanges, and you can receive renminbi now from all customers and distributors in China without them having to go through approval processes at the State Administration of Foreign Exchange or with banks.
Thank you, Christina. I think it's this is a very interesting topic. So I would like you to ask you again if you can highlight briefly what are the advantages and the disadvantages of using a Hong Kong versus China.
I think one of the main disadvantages of utilizing Hong Kong is the fact that if you want to make the operation, if you want to make that entity operational, meaning having staff on the ground, etc., the standard of living in Hong Kong is obviously more expensive than the standard of living in China. If you're thinking about office rent, employee salaries, etc., Hong Kong is much more expensive than it is in China. Although I do see this slightly changing in the Tier 1 cities in China, like Shanghai, where rent and salaries are also increasing. But Hong Kong is by far still of a higher standard of living. So, you know, when you're budgeting for your business, I think that's one of the serious disadvantages of Hong Kong. In terms of advantages, in my opinion, I think the structure is fantastic for SMEs that are starting off their business. One key point is that the Hong Kong government offers a lot of subsidies to foreign SMEs, which people don't necessarily know about. So there is research that should be done for that as well.
I agree also the Hong Kong government, that they have very good useful resources, like their websites are very informative, so I think that's definitely an advantage.
Obviously the next step, and I do have a lot of SMEs that do take the next step, is actually forgetting about establishing a Hong Kong company, but going directly into China. Many of them have the opinion that by the time that they make profits, regulations might change between Hong Kong and China, and as such, Hong Kong won't really have any advantages. Obviously, because of budgeting, China's might be cheaper than Hong Kong, so they decide to go straight ahead. For me, one of the biggest disadvantages in China is that you do have to have a proper business plan. You do need to calculate your cash flow, because obtaining capital in China is not easy. There are strict foreign currency controls. But one of the key new developments since March 1st, 2014 has been that the Chinese government has eliminated the concept of registered capital and total investment. You just need to make sure that you put enough capital in your company to sustain itself over a period of time. So that is now changing the environment for many SMEs that are looking to come into the market. Another disadvantage is also the fact that once you import product into China, you do have to pay customs duty as well as VAT. The VAT concept doesn't exist in Hong Kong either. The last case study I wanted to show was to give you all a concept of, in the long term, what your business model could look like in Asia. And these are for clients that have been doing business for a long time with China. Many of them have set up their Hong Kong company as an operational entity. They've utilized that to capture the Asian market. They even have warehousing facilities in Hong Kong in order to be able to cater to the Asian market as a whole. But they've also developed their own structure locally in China with a sales team in China to cater to just the Chinese market because of its size. And they also then have the warehousing capabilities locally to be able to cater to those customers. So this case study just shows you what you could potentially achieve in the long term and how your structures can be actually developed.
So Christine, in this same topic, like once the company has become successful in one or two jurisdictions, how could they like further develop?
Well, I think what's the key is obviously you need to start off in one jurisdiction first to see how the market develops. Then you go into the next. I'm a big believer of taking things step by step. But obviously, there are other markets locally here in Asia that are just booming. But one key thing that I think people need to realize that if you're looking to expand into markets like Vietnam or Thailand or Malaysia, you could do that all out of your Hong Kong company. But make sure you do your research in those jurisdictions. I find those jurisdictions much more wild and less developed than even China. I feel China has really developed itself into a more mature and developed market compared to the Asian region, for example. I just wanted to touch on the whole renminbi offshore center concept because this is what's piquing a lot of people's interests. People are now comparing Hong Kong and Singapore just in regards to renminbi and the renminbi business that can be developed. In my opinion, since Hong Kong started as the #1 offshore center already in 2004, it has a much more mature market when dealing with renminbi versus in Singapore. Singapore has only developed really in the last 3 to 4 years, and it hasn't reached the level completely of Hong Kong. So if your main concern is in regards to doing business in renminbi, I would definitely choose Hong Kong over Singapore in that regard. So I just wanted to sum up at the end the benefits basically for you as an SME as well as for your customers in Asia by having an Asian presence. Obviously, by having an Asian or China presence, you have your interests that are on the ground now, that are located locally. You have the prestige that's associated with that. You're showing greater face to your customers locally. You're also showing your commitment to the market. If you're establishing a Hong Kong company, it's much more easier to obtain bank credits. It doesn't happen overnight. It still does take about 1 to 2 years to develop a proper reputation with the bank in order to be able to obtain credits. You have favorable low tax rates, particularly in Hong Kong versus in China. You can obviously market yourself internationally by having a local Asian or China presence, allowing you to perhaps become the Asian supplier or the Asian customer globally. Asia, unlike many European as well as US countries, you can still have a sense of confidentiality with the banks as well as with your customers. In addition to that, by having a local presence and having local employees, you can eliminate language barriers, meaning you can communicate in the local tongue, you're in the same time zones, you can deliver your products on time, just in time, and then you can also buy and sell with local currency. And I think that's also one of the biggest advantages.
Christine, I also want to have your personal opinion on a matter, and it's like how important is in terms of prestige and giving face having your company in Hong Kong or Singapore versus having it in China.
In my opinion, if you're dealing just with mainland Chinese customers, I think in terms of prestige, it really does matter that you have an entity in China. You need to, I don't know, I always find that my customers like to know that I'm based in Shanghai or I have an office in Beijing and that it's close to them. And if there are problems, they can easily contact you. If you have mainland Chinese customers and they only see a Hong Kong address, that's already sometimes a little bit too far. It's closer still compared to Europe, but it's not as close as, for example, if you would be really in mainland China. The last slide I wanted to go into was just to give an understanding about what other options SMEs have in Europe in regards to other holding jurisdictions. Today I've mainly spoken about Hong Kong or Singapore as potential holding jurisdictions for Chinese investments. I am still a believer that Hong Kong is much more advantageous, but we still do see that a lot of SMEs in Europe utilize European holding jurisdictions to enter the Chinese market, like the Netherlands, UK, Luxembourg, Switzerland, and Ireland. All of these countries that I just mentioned, they are signing new double taxation agreements with China that are very similar in terms of advantages compared to Hong Kong and Singapore. So I would suggest that you do your research as well there and see whether that might be a better option. What I definitely would avoid is setting up structures in the British Virgin Islands, Seychelles, Cayman Islands, Mauritius, because in the eyes of the Chinese government, these are tax haven locations, and they don't see them as favorable. So I would avoid those locations if possible.
Okay, thank you very much, Christina. This was a very interesting presentation indeed, and now I think it's time for some Q&A. So I will encourage the participants to send us some inquiries. And I want to mention also that it might not be possible that we reply to all the inquiries now live during the webinar, but we will reply all of them by email in the following days. So I have a question. It's a company in Europe, and he's wondering, for European SMEs to offer tourism services to Chinese nationals. So, for example, tours to Europe from mainland Chinese. He's asking if it's required for this company to be registered in mainland China. Yeah. So, or it can be registered in Europe and provide these services to the clients from Europe directly.
What I've seen is that the tourism industry is still restricted in China. You can set up tourist offices for mainland Chinese that want to go overseas, or Europeans that want to go locally, but generally you need to have a joint venture partner, which means a existing Chinese tourist company that helps you. I just know that a lot of companies, in order to save cost, what they've done is that they've partnered with several tourist companies in China to market their products and services. And that might be a better first way to test the market.
So I understand, Christina, that once the tourists are in Europe, then these tour operators, they could be able to provide services, but not from directly there in China, right? For that they need a joint venture. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. And we have another question. If a Hong Kong company could issue an invoice in renminbi and receive payments in Hong Kong in renminbi.
Yes, this is possible.
Okay.
It's absolutely possible for you to issue the invoices in renminbi and receive renminbi, and the key thing is that your Chinese customer in China does not need to obtain any types of approvals now in order to remit the renminbi to your Hong Kong bank account.
Okay, so I think we still have time for one more question, and it's a technical question. I don't know if you could be able to answer that now, but I'm gonna ask you. It's if it's recommended to change the structure of a Hong Kong entity if one has set up a Hong Kong company in 2009, which is only holding the shares of a Chinese WOFE.
And to change that structure now, yeah, you can. You can change a structure at any point in time. There's no problems with that. The only thing you need to be careful of is capital gains tax. If your Chinese company, the shareholder is selling its shares, if that Chinese company has been making profit, then be wary of capital gains tax. And the problem with capital gains tax in China is that there's no specific rate. So that would need to be negotiated with your tax bureau.
Okay, thank you, Christina. Also, I have one question, which I think it's when you were talking about the advantages of Hong Kong, was one of the disadvantages was the cost of living. So the question is, like, if the standard of living is not to be higher in Singapore or Hong Kong compared to China. And in fact, there's been some reports that actually Singapore is one of the most expensive cities in the world. So how can SMEs minimize the cost in these locations?
That's a very personalized question. It's very difficult to minimize these costs in Hong Kong and Singapore compared to China. Obviously, well, I'll give you an example. In Hong Kong, there are two industrial parks or service parks. One is dedicated to the to sciences. So if people are interested in selling their medical products, biopharmaceuticals, biotechnology, electronics, then they can set up in this park and they get government subsidies to do research and development, and they offer extremely low rental prices to actually set up there. The same is in a zone called the Cyberport, which is dedicated to the media industry, and again there they have special rates for real estate. In regards to employees and salaries, this is difficult. You know, you have to weigh out the pros and cons. The salary levels might be higher, but the skills that you would obtain from Hong Kong employees, in my opinion, are still better and more developed than those you might find in China. Although that is changing, I have to admit. But that's still occurring. So it's difficult to say how people can minimize their costs. It's not easy.
Thank you, Christina. I still have one more question, and it's like, I think during your presentation it has been shown that holding companies or special purpose vehicles are not longer advantageous, not only for tax reasons. So is that true? Can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've seen in the last 12 months has really been that the tax bureaus have, in China, have really come down hard on companies that are based in holding jurisdictions. So it's not just in Hong Kong or Singapore, but it's also companies that are located in Seychelles, British Virgin Islands, even those that are in Ireland, Luxembourg, etc. If those holding companies are really just pure holding companies, you won't get the preferential tax rates. And the Chinese government will ask for documentation to prove whether they are operational or not. So, you know, in my opinion, if you're setting up a holding structure, it should be really more than just a holding structure. There should be economic substance or commercial substance in those entities as well.
Okay, Christina, so well, thank you very much. I think it's time for us to wrap up and then finish these webinars. So yeah, again, thank you very much, and I will just tell to all the attendees that this webinar will be uploaded into our website, so everyone can see it again. We will send also to all the participants the presentation, in the coming days. And I would like to announce that we are doing actually now a Central and Eastern Europe roadshow. We're going to have presentations in Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Slovenia. So for all the SMEs that are actually located in those countries, like I recommend to have a look at our website and sign up for these events. We're also going to be present at the Hanover Fair in the 2014 edition, which will be held in Hanover in April 7th. So we will have a presence there. Also, some of our experts will be giving a presentation, and again, I will welcome all the SMEs in these locations to join our events. So yeah, thank you very much, Christina. Thank you everyone for joining this webinar. We hope it was helpful for you, and we would like to see you soon again. So have a good afternoon or have a good day ahead if you're in Europe. Thank you very much.
The organizer has ended the session, and this call will be disconnected. Goodbye.